Hacks for surviving in the winter without power? We're back in the medieval village. Let's get into it. The first way our peasant friend kept warm was by doing something we all do at some point in our day, eating. But the types of foods available in the medieval winter were different than what you might find in a grocery store today. During the colder months, farmers relied on foods that could withstand the test of time and harsh weather conditions. The most common grain was wheat, which could be stored for long periods without spoiling. Its strong and dense nature made it an excellent choice for long-term preservation. Farmers would often use wheat to make bread, which was a staple of the medieval diet. They also grew barley, which they used for animal feed and brewing beer. Peas and beans were popular among peasants, because they could be dried and stored as these legumes provided essential nutrients like protein and fiber and were a good source of calories for those working long hours in the fields. Oats were another important grain in the winter. They were often used for animal feed, but the leftover grain was used for making porridge, a filling breakfast dish. They also had rye, a hardy grain that could grow in colder climates. Rye bread became a common sight during the winter, as it could be made from the grain that was available in the colder months. And then there were root vegetables like potatoes and carrots. These vegetables could be stored for the winter and were a good source of vitamins and minerals. And finally, preserved meats and fish played a role in the peasant diet. While fresh meat was harder to come by in the winter, salted, smoked, or dried meats and fish were readily available. These preserved foods were not only a source of protein, but also added flavor and variety to the winter meals. Now, imagine yourself seated around a rough-hewn table in a dimly lit room inside your peasant house. The wind howls outside, but within these four walls there's a sense of warmth. A fire crackles merrily in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the faces gathered around it. The air is filled with the aroma of a hearty stew, its warmth mingling with the scent of. In front of you sits a simple yet satisfying meal of bread and cheese, perhaps a slice of bacon or ham, and a mug of ale to warm your hands. If you're feeling adventurous, you might even dare to try a bit of that strange new spice, pepper, brought back from faraway lands by traveling merchants. After your meal, maybe you help your family clean up, and as the evening deepens, everyone settles down for bed. No electricity here, so lanterns are placed about the room to cast out the darkness. You snuggle under a heavy woolen blanket, the weight a comforting reminder of the warmth it holds in. Sleep comes easily. But if you were a peasant, you know tomorrow will bring with it the promise of a brand new day of hard work. For life in the Middle Ages was not all feasts and merriment, no matter how cozy the evenings could be. Now let's talk about another daily activity that helps us stay warm. Exercise. In the heart of winter, life in the village takes on a slower pace, but the need for physical activity doesn't disappear. Our peasant friend has to keep moving to keep his body working properly. But the type of exercise they did back then was a bit different than today. Imagine, after a morning of farm work, you and your friends decide to take a break for a game. What if I told you this game could not only be fun, but also a great workout? That's right. Medieval peasants had their own version of basketball, a game called handball. This game involved two teams trying to score by throwing a ball into the other team's goal using only their hands. Sounds simple, right? Well, trust me, it was anything but. These guys weren't playing a casual game. They were going all out, running, jumping, tackling each other to get that ball into the goal. It was a full-body workout, a medieval version of football. But handball wasn't the only game they played. Have you ever heard of a medieval obstacle course? The peasants would set up a series of challenges, using whatever they had on hand: logs, barrels, bales of hay. Villagers, young and old, would attempt to navigate this course as quickly as possible, leaping over hurdles, crawling under logs, and balancing on narrow beams. All the while, the crowd cheers them on. It was a test of strength, agility, and endurance. So whether it was through handball or the obstacle course, these games kept the villagers active and their bodies strong, ensuring they were ready to face whatever the next day might bring. And speaking of facing what the next day brings, let's talk about clothing. As the winter chill deepens, it's time for our peasant friend to put on his warmest clothes. Back in the Middle Ages, peasants wore clothes made from natural materials like wool, linen, and leather. Their clothing was designed to keep them warm and protect them from the elements. So let's break down their winter outfit. First, they would start with a basic tunic, a simple long-sleeved shirt made from linen or wool. This was the base layer, keeping him warm and insulating against the cold. Over this, he might wear a heavier wool shirt for extra warmth, especially during the coldest months. To protect him from the biting wind, he would don a hooded cloak, usually made from wool or even leather. The hood could be pulled tight around his face, shielding it from the cold. And then there were the sturdy shoes, typically made from leather and often reaching up to mid-calf to keep his feet dry and warm. And if it was really cold, he might even wear a hat to cover his ears and keep his head nice and toasty. Each piece was carefully chosen not only for warmth, but also for durability, as these clothes had to last. Enduring the rigors of daily life on the farm and the unforgiving chill of a medieval winter, so our peasant friend is well fed, moderately active, and bundled up in warm clothes. What else could keep him going through the harsh winter? Music. Music was an integral part of life in the Middle Ages, and it played a vital role in keeping the spirits of peasants high during the bleak winter months. In the evenings, after a long day of working in the fields, the villagers would gather together in their homes or in the town square to share stories and songs. The melodies they played on instruments such as the fiddle, the flute, and the harp were not just for entertainment. They were a source of comfort and warmth, creating a sense of community and camaraderie. Music was an integral part of many medieval celebrations, and it was no different during the winter. Carols and traditional songs were performed, adding a festive atmosphere to the otherwise gloomy season. These musical gatherings not only helped pass the time, but also served as a reminder that spring and the promise of warmer days were just around the corner. Music in the Middle Ages was more than just a form of entertainment. It was a way of life, and for the peasants, it was a source of strength and solace during the harsh winter months. All right, now let's talk about an activity that keeps us happy: storytelling. As the night deepens and the wind continues its mournful song outside, The flickering firelight within the peasant cottage does its best to ward off the encroaching darkness. The family is gathered close, sharing stories and jokes in the warm glow. It's a small respite from the harsh realities of winter, a moment of joy in the midst of bleak days. The father might recount tales of bravery and adventure from the distant past, holding his audience spellbound with every word. The mother, with a twinkle in her eye, shares funny stories about the antics of the village children, eliciting peals of laughter from the little ones. The warmth of their home and the love shared among them serves as a shield against the winter chill. It's a testament to the human spirit, its ability to find warmth and happiness even in the darkest of times. But the winter night isn't just filled with stories. There's singing, too. The family breaks into song, their voices blending together in harmony. The lyrics speak of hope and resilience, of the triumph of light over darkness, of the promise of spring's return. It's a celebration of life, a refusal to let the winter blues get the better of them. As the songs reach their crescendo, the family feels a surge of warmth, not just in their bodies, but in their hearts. It's a reminder that even in the coldest of winters, the human spirit, like a flickering candle, can light up the darkest of nights with the warmth of love, laughter, and song. We hope you enjoyed this journey back to the Middle Ages. If you want to learn more about medieval life, continue to watch this video. In this video, we'll be taking a peek inside the home of peasants during the Middle Ages. What will life be like for these poor villagers? Will they have enough food and supplies to get through the winter? Let's jump in. As the sun begins its slow descent, casting long shadows across the village, the working day draws to a close for the peasant family. The father, Thomas, a man of strong build and weathered features, hangs up his tools, the implements that have been his companions throughout the day. His hands, calloused and worn, are a testament to a lifetime of toil in the fields. The mother, Isabella, her face etched with the hardships and joys of a life well lived, kneads dough on the rough-hewn table, her nimble fingers moving with practiced ease. She has awoken before sunrise, tended to the animals, gathered what she could from their small garden, collected firewood, and now prepares a simple meal for her family. Their 2 children, a sturdy young boy named Wilhelm and a sweet little girl with a head full of dreams, help set the table, their laughter echoing in the small space. Life for this peasant family is not an easy one. They live in a small one-room cottage with dirt floors and walls made of mud and straw. There is no glass in their windows, just shutters to keep out the wind and rain. A turf roof keeps the worst of the elements at bay, but it is their hearth that is the heart of their home. Here, over the crackling fire, they eat their simple meals of bread, cheese, and salted meats. As dusk deepens into night, Thomas settles into a chair near the hearth, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. The chill of the evening seeps into the small cottage, but the family is warm, nestled together for comfort. They share stories and jokes, their voices creating a cozy symphony of love and laughter. The wind may howl outside, but here within these 4 walls there is peace. The fire crackles merrily, casting flickering shadows on the worn walls. Outside, the first snowflakes of winter begin to fall. But here, in the warm glow of their hearth, all is well. Peasant houses were usually one-room structures, very small and without many furnishings. Typically, the only furniture would be a large hearth, which took up a good portion of the floor space, along with some sort of raised platform used as a bed, chests for storage, and a table. Meals were eaten off of one's lap or the table, and cooking was done over the fire. Some wealthy peasants might have a spinning wheel or loom in the house, but most work was done outside of the home, in the fields, forests, or roadsides. The peasant family eked out their existence on the edge of society. Their lives were hard, their days filled with endless chores, and their nights often cold and dark. But they had each other, and that made all the difference. As the final embers glow in the hearth, the family huddles closer, their love a warm blanket against the encroaching darkness. The storm may rage on, but here in the quiet of their humble abode, there is solace. The father, Thomas, is a man of few words, his gruff exterior hiding a heart of gold. He works tirelessly to provide for his family, his strong arms bearing the weight of their survival. The mother, Isabella, is the glue that holds the family together. Her gentle touch and unwavering love create a haven of warmth and comfort in their tiny cottage. The son, Wilhelm, is a bright and curious boy, eager to learn the ways of the world. He helps his father in the fields and listens intently to his mother's tales. And the daughter, with her infectious laughter, brings joy into every corner of their humble home. She dreams of a world beyond their village, a world where she can dance under the moonlight without a care in the world. In the depths of winter, the harsh winds of January bite through the flimsy walls of the peasant cottage. Snow piled high against the door, muffling the sounds of the raging storm. Inside, the family huddles together for warmth, their love a shield against the bitter cold. Thomas, the patriarch, sits stoically by the hearth, his weathered face etched with concern. Isabella, ever resourceful, gathers her children close, sharing stories to lift their spirits. Wilhelm, the eldest, helps his father stoke the fire, while his sister, lost in a world of make-believe, dances around the room, chasing away the shadows of fear. As the storm rages on, the family's bond deepens, their love a beacon of light in the darkness. They may be poor, they may be cold, but they are not alone. Together, they will face the challenges of winter and emerge stronger, more resilient than ever before. And how do the peasants stay warm during the freezing cold winter? During the winter months, temperatures would plummet, and it would become very difficult for peasants to keep warm in their tiny, drafty hut. Peasants slept in the same clothes they worked in, and many slept in a single bed, or even in the same bed with their parents. For the very young, the elderly, and the sick, the cold could be deadly. Many peasants would try to keep warm by drinking hot liquids such as cider or beer. But this was not a very effective way to raise your body temperature. More practical methods included sleeping in layers of clothing, using blankets, rugs, and quilts for warmth, and huddling together for heat. Sometimes peasants would use hot stones or bottles filled with hot water to keep warm in bed. A typical peasant house consisted of one room, with the main areas being the bedroom, kitchen, and living room all in the same space. Usually a partition or a simple curtain separated the different areas. There was no furniture except for a large hearth that took up a big part of the floor space. The hearth was used for cooking and heating the home. There was also a raised platform that served as a bed, as well as chests for storage and a table. Eating was done either off one's lap or the table, and people would eat with their hands or with wooden spoons. In the corner, there was a three-legged stool for spinning, weaving, and other household tasks. Sometimes a peasant might own a spinning wheel or a loom, but most of the work was done outside the home. The walls were made of mud and straw and were decorated with fabrics or tapestries to keep out drafts. The roof was made of thatch or wood and was designed to keep the rain and wind from coming in. A dirt floor was standard and a small window let in natural light. During the Middle Ages, most people were peasants who lived in poverty. They worked long hours as farmers, servants, or laborers, and rarely had any leisure time. When they weren't working, they spent their time trying to secure food and supplies for their families. They also had to deal with the threat of disease, famine, and war. Despite these hardships, they found ways to make their lives more bearable. They formed strong communities and relied on their faith to help them through tough times. They also found ways to have fun, such as by attending festivals, playing games, and telling stories. Despite the many challenges they faced, the peasants of the Middle Ages were a resilient and resourceful group of people. They were able to endure some of the worst conditions imaginable and still find ways to make their lives better. We can learn a lot from their strength and determination. So there you have it, a glimpse into the lives of the poor villagers during the Middle Ages. It is important to remember that these people were real, human beings who lived in a different time period with different customs and traditions than we do today. By learning about their lives, we can gain a deeper understanding of history and the world around us. So next time you see a medieval peasant village, take a moment to appreciate the rich history and culture that these places represent. Who knows? You might just learn something new and inspiring. It's late in the evening, and two knights are making their way back to the castle after a long day of patrol. The flickering torchlight paints the gleaming surfaces of their armor in vivid shades, announcing their return to the villagers. Their footsteps echo on the cobblestones, mingling with the murmurs of townsfolk peeking out from their homes to catch a glimpse of their noble protectors. Our first knight returns from patrol, having ridden hard all day along the King's Road. A magnificent war horse, with powerful muscles rippling beneath its harness, paws the ground impatiently at the end of a long day. He needs to get this horse back to the stable, but first he removes his helmet. The gesture is a common one, a familiar sight for these villagers who have seen him pass through many times before. They know the dangers that lurk beyond the safety of the village walls, and they appreciate the knight's dedication to their security. For this knight is not just a warrior, he is their protector, a bulwark against the darkness that threatens their world. He wears a suit of plate armor, the epitome of medieval craftsmanship, each piece a masterpiece of metal. First comes the pauldrons, which protect his shoulders. These are hinged and articulated, allowing for a full range of motion while still providing vital protection. Notice the little details, like the shoulder spikes that add both intimidation and functionality. They help keep the knight stable in the saddle during battle and also serve as an additional defense mechanism. Then we have the cuirass, the centerpiece of any knight's armor, protecting the vital organs with overlapping plates. This one has been polished to a mirror shine, but even more impressive are the intricate designs etched into the metal. And let's not forget about the greaves, which cover his shins and knees. Those two are finely crafted and once again reflect the quality of the blacksmiths who made them. Finally, there are the gauntlets, expertly crafted to allow for dexterity while still providing protection. Can you imagine wielding a sword or shield without the ability to grip them properly? These gauntlets solve that problem. Underneath the armor, he wears a padded arming doublet, a functional yet unassuming garment. It's made of layers of quilted fabric that help absorb the shock of blows, providing an additional layer of defense between his body and his metal armor. This isn't something you'd typically see on display at a castle, but it's an essential part of a knight's equipment nonetheless. And what would a knight be without his helmet? In this case, a sallet, a style popular during the 14th and 15th centuries, its distinctive visor raised, revealing a weathered face. We can tell he's seen his fair share of battles and adventures. Now, take a close look at the intricate design of this helmet. The edges are flared, not just for aesthetics, but also to help protect against incoming blows. And that plume holder, it's not just a fancy accessory. It's designed to hold a plume or a small flag that identifies the knight's allegiance. It's a symbol of loyalty and a warning to their enemies. The second knight, though different in appearance, is equally impressive, clad in a full hauberk of chainmail, a testament to the durability of this warrior. Chainmail was a staple of medieval armor, consisting of interlocking metal rings that provided excellent protection against most weapons. This knight's armor is made of steel, a high-quality material that offers superior defense compared to the cheaper iron mail. But there's more to this knight than just his armor. Look closely at his headgear. Instead of a helmet, he's wearing a mail coif, a protective hood made of interwoven metal rings. This was a common sight among medieval foot soldiers and provided crucial protection for the head and neck. What really makes this knight stand out is this woolen overgarment displays the coat of arms of his lord, a badge of loyalty and identification. Surcoats were not only practical for bearing these heraldic symbols, but also served as a way to distinguish knights from one another, each color and design telling the story of a knight's allegiance. Now, let's talk about their shields, an often overlooked part of a knight's equipment. Our first knight carries a kite shield, a medieval staple, large and sturdy, ideal for both defense and support when fighting on horseback. It's a classic teardrop shape, slightly longer on the top than on the bottom, providing good coverage while still allowing for some mobility. These were commonly used by infantry and cavalry alike, and their size made them perfect for use on the battlefield. And then there's our second knight. His shield is different, a heater shield. This type was popular in the late Middle Ages and was known for its rectangular shape and central boss, a prominent knob on the front that helped reinforce the shield. These were commonly used by men-at-arms and other heavy infantry, offering great protection during those intense medieval battles. Both shields are painted with heraldic symbols, displaying the owner's noble lineage and affiliations. Knights took great pride in their shields, not only because they were an important part of their equipment, but also because they were a visible representation of their identity and loyalty. As they walk, their armor chimes softly, a gentle melody echoing through the quiet village. It's a sound that resonates with the rhythm of their steps, creating a sense of camaraderie and shared purpose. These two knights, though different in their equipment and roles, are united by their service and dedication. And that brings us to the end of this scene. Thank you for joining us as we explore the world of medieval knights. If you enjoyed this journey through time, don't forget to stay tuned for more exciting adventures. Until next time, keep an eye out for those knights in shining armor. You never know when you might need their help. Spinning thread from flax was one of the few rural industries that women were allowed to do, although men did it too when they weren't working the fields. Men also spun hempen ropes for fishing nets. In the 14th century, King Edward III of England passed sumptuary laws that decreed peasants could not wear certain luxurious fabrics like silk, satin, velvet, or fine furs. Only the nobility were allowed those. Peasants had to make do with what they had, but they made it work. The women are dressed in long woolen gowns that reach their ankles and are layered over linen. They keep their hair covered with linen cord. Some of the women are wearing aprons made of linen that are tied at the waist, which is good because it keeps the goats from eating the thread they are spinning. Their winter cloaks are practical but humble, like the rest of their clothing. Sometimes they are lined with rabbit or lamb fur to keep out the winter chill. Even though the fur trade was a big business in medieval Europe, the skins of rabbits and lambs were considered too coarse and too common to be made into garments, so the pelts were used as linings instead. This was good enough for the peasants, since any extra warmth they could get was a blessing. But it wasn't good enough for the king's sumptuary laws, which prohibited peasants from using any fur lining at all. So these had to be hidden under the skirts of their cloaks. The women are gathering in a sheltered spot, probably just outside the communal hall of their village, where they can spin their flax into thread using hand spindles and There would have been spinning flax that was grown and harvested in the summer and fall, and they would spin it into thread to be used for sewing during the winter months. When there was no field work to be done, some of the women are sitting on benches, others are standing up. One woman is holding up her skirt so she can hook the spindle with her fingers inside the waistband of her dress. Another has a spindle between her knees while she pulls her skirt down around her ankles. She's kneeling on a stool to make it easier to spin. And a third woman is standing with her back against the wall, holding her cloak in her left hand and a spindle in her right. Her spindle is dropping rather low, which suggests she's a beginner spinner and hasn't mastered the knack of keeping it up with her thumb and forefinger. The woman next to her is an expert spinner, though, and her spindle is flying as she spins and spins and spins. All around them are piles of flax that need to be spun, and they have brought oil lamps or rushlights to give them flickering light to see what they are doing. The rhythmic clack of the spindles fills the air as they work, along with the murmur of conversation. No doubt they are swapping news and gossip as well as keeping an eye out for any wolves who might want to snatch up a stray dog or a defenseless child. For even in the safety of their village, they knew that wolves could get over the walls if they were hungry enough. It's the year 1348, and winter has arrived in full force across Europe. The peasants wake up early in their one-roomed thatched cottage. There is no record of what time exactly the peasants wake up, but for the purpose of this story, let's say it's around first light. The hearth is cold from last night, and a thin layer of frost glistens on the thatched roof above them. Outside, the wind moans and whistles through the gaps in the wattle and daub walls, carrying with it the promise of another bitterly cold day. But the sun, however weak, is climbing higher, and with it comes hope of warmth and light. The wife kneels beside the hearth and begins the slow ritual of coaxing a fire back into life, gathering up the embers from last night and poking them into a reluctant glow. The husband rises, his joints stiff from the cold, and moves to the small table where he sits down to eat breakfast with his family. On it is a simple meal, perhaps bread, cheese and ale, maybe some porridge or eggs if they are lucky. They eat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts as they consider the day ahead. The wife, her hands gnarled and strong from years of toil, looks out the window at the frost-covered fields beyond. She knows that today will be another hard day of work. The crops may have been gathered in, but the land is still theirs to tend. The animals still need feeding, and there are always repairs to be made. As the sun climbs higher, she turns back to her work, reaching for the distaff and spindle to start spinning the flax that will become tomorrow's bread. Her young daughter watches her for a moment, then wanders off to play. The son, a strapping lad now, prepares to leave the cottage and head out to the fields. He pulls on his heavy woolen tunic, a hand-me-down from his father, and secures it with a leather belt. His trousers are tucked into knee-high boots, and a hooded cloak is thrown over his shoulder for warmth. Before leaving, he takes a crust of bread from the table, a simple fare for a peasant, yet a necessity to sustain him through the day's labor. He nods to his parents and sets off into the frosty air. Meanwhile, in a distant village, a group of men in woolen tunics and women in long gowns with linen coifs are gathered in the communal yard of their street. Their breath hangs in the frosty air as they work, mending tools, spinning wool, and tending to livestock. The men straighten and sharpen sickles and scythes, their muscles rippling beneath their rough-spun shirts. The women deftly ply their distaffs, their nimble fingers flying as they spin thread from flax. Nearby, a sturdy cart creaks under the weight of freshly threshed wheat, its golden kernels glinting in the weak winter sun. A team of oxen, their breath misting in the cold air, stand patiently nearby, awaiting their turn to haul another load. In the center of the yard, a group of children, rosy-cheeked and laughing, weave between the adults, playing at being farm animals or weaving imaginary tapestries. As the men work, they share gossip and jokes, their voices echoing across the yard. Tales of daring exploits and local romances mixed with practical advice on everything from the best way to mend a broken scythe to the latest news from neighboring villages. The women, too, find time for laughter and chatter, their needles flashing as they spin. They swap stories about their families, discuss the best recipes for the meager rations they have stored away for the winter, and share their hopes and dreams for the coming year. Some dream of a spring thaw that will bring new growth to their crops. Others hope for a summer free from disease and pestilence. All know that their survival depends on their ability to stick together. And so they work and joke and laugh, drawing strength from their shared purpose and camaraderie. As the morning progresses, the work continues. The sounds of industry mingling with the laughter of the children at play. The villagers are a hardy lot, their faces weathered and worn by the hard life they have lived. But there is a strength in their eyes that belies their age, a strength born of necessity and tempered by years of struggle and survival. They have seen better days, to be sure, but they have also seen worse, and they know that as long as they stick together, they can endure anything. Suddenly, a cry rings out across the yard, startling the villagers from their work. A knight in shining armor stands at the entrance to the village, his sword at his side and his shield emblazoned with the crest of the local lord. With him are two squires, both younger, less experienced members of the nobility, who serve as attendants and assistants to the knight. Their armor is not as polished as their leaders, but they are no less fierce of countenance. The knight calls out to the men, and a hush falls over the crowd. The villagers, their faces a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, stop their work and turn to face the newcomer. The knight, his voice ringing with authority, delivers his message from the lord of the manor, reminding the peasants of their duty to the crown and their obligations to their overlord. He speaks of the upcoming harvest and urges the villagers to prepare their fields and plant their crops. He reminds them that the Lord expects them to meet their quotas and pay their dues, and warns them that any failure to do so will result in punishment. The squire at his side steps forward to emphasize the knight's words, reminding the villagers of the importance of order and obedience in their society. The peasants, their faces grave, listen intently. They understand the power the nobility holds over them, and know that they must obey or face the consequences. With their message delivered, the knights and squires turn to leave. The villagers watch as they climb onto their horses, their armor glinting in the winter sun, and ride off down the road. The sound of their departure echoes across the yard, mingling with the cries of the children at play. The villagers slowly begin to disperse, returning to their work with renewed vigor. The sun climbs higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the yard. The villagers work steadily, knowing that they must make the most of the daylight hours before the cold sets in again. The air grows colder as the day progresses, and a light snowfall begins. The villagers, their faces grim, tighten their wraps and press on. They have no choice but to work even in the falling snow. If they don't, they won't have enough food to last the winter. As the light begins to fade, the villagers pack up their tools and head for home. The snow falls steadily now, blanket in the yard in a thick layer of white. The peasants trudge through the snow, their bodies weary from a day of hard work. As they make their way through the village, they pass by the market square, where stalls are piled high with goods. The sight of food, even if they cannot afford it, stirs their hunger. Some of the peasants shake their heads sadly and hurry on, while others stop to haggle for a loaf of bread or a few apples. The square is bustling with activity as people go about their daily business. The sound of bartering mingles with the laughter of children at play, creating a sense of normalcy in an otherwise chaotic world. Some of the peasants stop to chat with friends and neighbors, exchanging news and gossip. They talk about the weather, the crops, and the latest rumors from the king's court. For a moment, they forget the hardship of their lives and enjoy the simple pleasure of human companionship. As the snow falls, the villagers make their way back to their cottages, each lost in their own thoughts. The darkness of winter envelops the village, and the only light comes from the occasional flickering lantern or hearth fire. Inside their homes, the peasants strip off their heavy coats and woolen hats, revealing threadbare tunics and trousers. They wash their hands in a basin of cold water, trying to warm them by the meager fires in their stone fireplaces. As the temperature drops, they huddle together for warmth, seeking comfort in the familiar faces of their families. The men tell stories of their day's work, the women mend clothes, and the children play at being adults. Despite the cold and the darkness, there is a sense of peace in the village. The peasants are resilient, resourceful people, and they know that they can endure anything as long as they have each other. In the distance, the castle looms strong against the darkening sky, a symbol of order and protection in a world that often feels chaotic and dangerous. The peasants may be poor, and their lives may be hard, but they know that they are not alone. They have each other, and they have the king's justice to protect them. As the night deepens, the villagers settle in for bed, each lost in their own thoughts. They dream of warmer days and better times, and they take comfort in the belief that spring will come again. The snow continues to fall outside, blanketing the village in a peaceful hush, a stark reminder of the harsh realities of peasant life in medieval Europe. But within the warm embrace of their homes, the peasants find solace and strength in their family and community, knowing that together they can endure anything. Before the days of central heating, indoor plumbing, and antibiotics, people had to rely on some pretty creative methods to keep themselves warm and healthy during the cold months. And while we might think of today's holiday season as a cozy, heartwarming time, it was actually quite dangerous. Let's learn how medieval peasants coped with the cold and stayed healthy all winter long. Welcome to life in the Middle Ages, where history comes alive. To fend off the ever-present spectre of winter illness, medieval peasants, men in thick woolen tunics, hose and leather boots, women in long woolen gowns, layered over linen chemises, their heads covered with linen coifstrew upon a rich heritage of herbal knowledge carefully passed down through the generations. Guided by village healers, they harvested chamomile, mint, sage and thyme from cottage gardens, and ventured to the hedgerows for plantain and elder. These plants were transformed into healing poultices for wounds and aching joints, soothing salves blended with rendered animal fat to protect and mend chapped or cracked skin, and steaming hot herbal teas to ease coughs, colds and fevers, remedies believed to restore warmth and balance to the body. Families shared not only their remedies but also their expertise, teaching children to identify and prepare these vital plants safely. When illness struck hard, the community rallied. Neighbors, wrapped in woolen cloaks and fur-lined mantles, took turns caring for the sick and elderly, ensuring they received nourishing food, warmth, and comfort. This spirit of shared wisdom and collective care was essential to the village's survival through the long, bitter months of winter. The sun dips below the horizon earlier each day, casting long shadows that signal the approach of darkness. The villagers have finished their evening meal of bread, cheese, and perhaps a bit of pork or fish. Now they gather around a small table, their faces illuminated by the flickering glow of a hearth fire. In the center sits a mortar and pestle, along with a variety of dried herbs and flowers. One of the villagers, an experienced healer, is preparing a remedy for a neighbor who has fallen ill. With practiced hands, she measures out a mixture of dried ingredients, combining the soothing properties of chamomile and mint with the warming qualities of ginger and cloves. She grinds the mixture into a fine powder, ready to be mixed into a tea. The pungent aroma of the herbs fills the room, mingling with the smell of wood smoke and baking bread. As the potion simmers on the stove, its steam rising like wisps of magic, the villagers discuss the day's events, their voices low and intimate. The power of herbs wasn't just in their healing properties, but also in their ability to drive out evil spirits and bring balance to the body and soul. Life in medieval Europe during the winter was a challenge, especially for the peasants who made up the majority of the population. They lived in small villages, often in poverty, and were largely uneducated. However, they did have one thing in common: a deep connection to the land. They understood the healing properties of plants and herbs, and used them to treat common ailments such as colds, cuts, and bruises. Back then, there were no modern medicines or doctors to turn to, so they relied on what they knew from experience and what their ancestors had taught them. For example, they would use willow bark to relieve pain, lavender to soothe anxiety, and chamomile to promote sleep. They also used animal fats and plant-based oils to treat skin conditions and injuries. Despite the lack of formal medical knowledge, their methods were surprisingly effective. They didn't have antibiotics, but they knew that keeping wounds clean and bandaged could prevent infection. They didn't have painkillers, but they understood the power of distraction and suggestion in helping people cope with pain. In a way, they were practicing a form of holistic medicine long before it became popular. They understood the interconnectedness of the mind, body, and spirit, and treated them all in their healing practices. Although many of their beliefs and practices may seem strange or even superstitious to us today, it's important to remember that they were trying to do the best they could with the knowledge and resources they had available. Their deep connection to the land and their willingness to share their knowledge and skills with others allowed them to survive and thrive in a world that was often harsh and unforgiving. Houses in medieval villages were typically small and made from whatever materials were readily available, such as wood, stone, or brick. They usually consisted of 1 or 2 rooms with thatched roofs and dirt floors. While these homes provided shelter from the elements, they were not very well insulated, and this made it difficult to keep warm during the winter months. During the winter, the temperature inside a typical peasantess home could drop to around 32 degrees Fahrenheit or 0 degrees Celsius. That's about the freezing point of water. It might not sound too bad, but when you consider that the average person needs to maintain an internal body temperature of around 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit or 37 degrees Celsius to function properly, you can start to understand how difficult it would have been for the peasants to stay warm enough to avoid hypothermia. Peasants used a variety of methods to try to keep their homes warm enough during the winter. They might use things like blankets and furs to cover windows and doors, straw or hay to provide insulation, small fires to provide heat, although they were careful to keep the fires small, since a large fire would quickly consume all of the available fuel and leave them without any heat for the rest of the night. Of course, if you have a fireplace, it's essential to have something to burn in order to keep warm. But fuel could be scarce during the winter months when villagers had to ration their supplies. Luckily, they had plenty of options for burning, including wood, which was easy to come by and burn, although it could produce a lot of smoke. Animal dung, which was often used as a supplemental fuel source. Peat, which was a type of compressed moss that could be cut into blocks and burned much like coal. While these methods helped to some extent, it was still difficult for peasants to stay warm enough during the winter. They might huddle together in groups to share body heat, or take turns sleeping near the fire while the others slept in warmer parts of the house. Despite these challenges, peasants managed to make it through the winter. They understood the importance of staying warm and would do whatever it took to keep themselves and their families safe from the cold. The resilience and resourcefulness of medieval peasants is truly remarkable. When you think about how they managed to survive in such challenging conditions without modern technology or conveniences, they were able to keep themselves warm and healthy by using natural resources and traditional methods, such as burning peat, wood, or animal dung in their homes, wearing layers of warm clothing, eating hearty meals to keep their bodies fueled, and using herbal remedies to treat illnesses and ailments. The diet of medieval peasants consisted mainly of bread, which was made from flour and water and was a staple of their diet. Vegetables, such as cabbage, onions, and carrots, were often grown in small gardens near their homes. Meat was not as common, but when it was eaten, it was usually in the form of pork or poultry. They also consumed dairy products, such as milk, cheese, and butter, as well as eggs from chickens and other poultry. Overall, their diet was fairly bland and repetitive, but it provided the necessary calories and nutrients to keep them alive. Additionally, they would eat seasonal foods such as berries and fruits in the summer and store them in the winter. Although the winters were harsh and life was difficult for medieval peasants, they found ways to keep themselves occupied during the long nights. Some of the ways they spent their time included playing board games such as chess and checkers, telling stories and jokes, singing songs and playing instruments, praying and reading religious texts, and talking with family and friends. They also participated in festivals and celebrations whenever possible, such as Christmas and Easter, to break up the monotony of everyday life. Overall, medieval peasants were able to cope with the harsh winters of the Middle Ages through a combination of practical measures and communal support. By using natural resources, sharing knowledge, and working together, they were able to stay warm, fed and entertained throughout the long, cold months. And while their lives were certainly not easy, they were able to find ways to make the best of their situation and maintain a sense of community and hope. The year is 1276. You are the lord of the manor. Winter has arrived and has settled over your lands like a shroud. 4 days now, icy winds have clawed at the valley, rattling the windows in your great hall. And this morning you awoke to find the courtyard choked with a thin layer of frost, sparkling like a field of diamonds under the pale winter sun. Your steward has informed you that one of your farms has been partially lost to the recent storms, and that the villagers are preparing for the long, cold months ahead. As the lord of these lands, it is up to you to ensure that all within your domain are prepared for whatever winter may throw at them. It is up to you to lead your people through the frozen months and emerge in the spring with your power intact and your people prosperous once more. But how? How do you survive winter in the Middle Ages? Your first order of business is to ensure that your castle is ready to withstand the coming onslaught of bad weather. Medieval castles were built to last. Their thick stone walls and towers, capable of holding back siege engines and cannon fire, could easily stand up to even the worst winter storms. But just because your castle was designed to withstand battering rams and trebuchets does unmean that it was constructed with the insulation in mind. In fact, most medieval castles weren't. This meant that during the winter months, they became cold, drafty places, and the threat of hypothermia loomed large over anyone who had to stay inside them. And the only way to avoid this fate was to ensure that fires were kept burning throughout the keep, and that those fires were fed with an almost constant supply of firewood. Luckily for you, you live in a wooded area, so gathering enough wood to heat your castle shouldn't be too much of a problem. However, you need to make sure that you have enough manpower to actually bring all of that wood back to the castle and stack it up inside. After all, a fire is only as good as the fuel supply that keeps it burning. If your castle is going to be a refuge from the storm, then you must prepare it accordingly. But as you walk through the stone archway into the outer ward and look around you, you see that there are other preparations that need to be made before winter truly sets in. Most pressing is the issue of the portcullis was a large grating made of iron or thick wooden planks that was lowered in front of the main entrance to the castle in times of war or siege. This would stop enemy soldiers from entering the castle by force and would protect the inhabitants from incoming arrows or catapult projectiles. But now, with winter fast approaching, you know that the portcullis must come down if the castle is to be properly defended. Not only will it prevent the worst of the winter winds from entering the castle, but it will also stop any animals from getting in and help maintain the heat inside. With the portcullis in place, you can begin to seal off the castle from the elements. However, one of the things that made medieval castles such imposing fortresses was also their Achilles heel. While large enough to house hundreds of people, a medieval castle required an almost Herculean effort to heat during the winter months. Unless you wanted to spend the winter outside, which was an excellent way to get frostbite, you needed a steady supply of firewood to keep your castle warm. That's not a problem, right? After all, you live in a forest, but delivering that wood to the various hearths around your castle is another matter entirely. Medieval castles were often built on top of hills or mounds to make them harder to attack. Unfortunately, this also made them less than ideal. when it came to moving bulky items around. Given that the delivery routes to the various halls and towers of your castle may be blocked by snow, you'll have to rely on manpower to move your precious fuel supply. So start organizing now, or you might be in for a long, cold winter. You send your men out to gather what wood they can, and over time, the courtyard begins to resemble a scene from the Norse myth of Ragnarok, with huge logs piled high beside the tall stone structures. But you know that all this wood will be wasted without someone to keep the fires burning. Thankfully, your castle is UN short of people willing to don an axe and take up a sword to defend it. You just have to make sure they are UN spending the whole winter frozen to death in the courtyard. And so you send word for your men to hold a training session. In the courtyard, everyone turns out, and you feel a surge of pride as you watch your knights in their polished armor, swords at the ready, practicing their fighting stances, their movements fluid and graceful, despite the weight of their weapons. Behind them, your men in their woolen tunics and hose spar lightly, their laughter echoing across the yard as they practice their archery. You call them to halt and stand before them. Then you announce that the time has come for the annual martial review. Your knights will face off against each other in a series of friendly bouts, showcasing their skill and testing their mettle. Your archers will compete in a contest to see who can best hit the bull's eye from the greatest distance. And your men-at-arms will engage in mock battles, letting loose volleys of arrows and returning blow for blow with their swords and shields. As the sounds of combat echo across the courtyard, you know that you have nothing to worry about. These men and women are some of the finest fighters in the kingdom. They've trained year-round to be ready for battle, and you're confident they'll prevail no matter what the winter has in store. As the day wears on, the competitions grow more intense. Knights clash, steel on steel, their horses snorting and pawing the ground. Archers line up to take their shots, their bows taut with potential energy. Men-at-arms charge forward, their shields held high, their swords flashing in the sunlight. With each passing moment, the atmosphere crackles with excitement. Spectators crowd around, their cheers and jeers echoing across the yard. The review lasts for hours, but as the sun begins to set, the winners are announced. The best archer receives a prize, a beautifully crafted longbow and a quiver of arrows. The most skilled knight is awarded a silver goblet, and the victorious men-at-arms are given lengths of fine linen cloth. Victors and spectators alike celebrate with mugs of spiced ale, their laughter mingling with the music of your harpists. As the night draws on, you find yourself surrounded by your knights, your men and women in arms, and your loyal retainers. You raise your mug and make a toast to their skill, their courage, and their loyalty. The future looks bright, and you know that your castle will endure the winter and emerge stronger than ever. The snows fall thick and fast, blanketing the world in white. Within the castle walls, life continues as normal. Servants bustle about, preparing meals and tending to the fires. Farmers gather around the hearth, sharing stories and jokes. Knights polish their armor, readying it for the next training session. And children play, their laughter echoing across the halls. Life goes on in the midst of winter's fury, a testament to the strength and resilience of medieval society. As the blizzard rages outside, you sit by the fire in the great hall, sipping hot chocolate and watching the flames dance. You're surrounded by your family and retainers, and you feel a sense of peace and contentment. Despite the howling winds and the falling snow, you know that you are safe within these 4 stone walls. The castle is your sanctuary, and you are its lord. The winter may rage on, but you are ready for it. You've prepared your castle, you've trained your men, and you've gathered your resources. All you have to do now is wait for spring. The biting cold of winter descended upon the village, blanketing the thatched roofs and timbered walls in frost. Inside their cozy cottages, medieval peasants made ready to shelter their livestock, bringing cows, goats, chickens and pigs into the lower level of their homes. Men clad in thick woolen tunics, belted at the waist, woolen hose and sturdy leather boots, worked alongside women, who wore long woolen gowns layered over linen chemises, their heads covered by linen coifs or woolen hoods for extra warmth. Together, they coaxed the animals into their shared living space, securing them from the harsh winter elements and predators alike. With the livestock settled in, the family spent their days tending to the fire, cooking meals and performing their household tasks by the flickering light of hearth and candle. Their evenings were filled with the murmur of conversation, the clatter of dishes, and the occasional lively tune on a fiddle or flute. The air grew thick with the scent of wood smoke, roasting meat and baking bread, mingling with the earthy aroma of animals and the sweet fragrance of flowers gathered during the warmer months and dried for winter use. It was a comforting blend of smells, a testament to the simple yet hearty life lived by these medieval peasants. As night fell, heavy wooden doors were bolted shut, creating a warm and safe haven against the growing chill outside. The family, along with their animals, huddled together for warmth, sharing blankets and sleeping in the same room. Cows, goats, chickens, even pigs, all sought refuge in this intimate space, creating a symphony of sounds throughout the night, from the lowing of cattle to the clucking of chickens and the snorts of pigs. Despite the cacophony, there was a comforting rhythm to it, a lullaby of the countryside that lulled the family to sleep. Now, this may seem like an unusual arrangement to us today, but it was common practice in medieval Europe for peasants to share their living spaces with their animals. And it wasn't just a necessity, it was a way of life. This practice, known as a byre house, was particularly prevalent in England and other parts of northern Europe where winters were long and harsh. In fact, archaeological evidence suggests that this tradition dates back to prehistoric times. The idea behind a byre house was simple. Animals generated heat through their natural body processes, and this heat was captured within the enclosed space of a house, raising its overall temperature and providing a more comfortable living environment for humans during the winter months. By bringing their animals indoors, medieval peasants could maintain a constant supply of fresh milk, cheese and eggs, ensuring they had access to vital nutrients that would otherwise be scarce during the colder months. Additionally, the animals provided a sense of security, keeping inhabitants warm and warding off potential predators. But it wasn't without its challenges. Managing a shared living space with animals required careful planning and organization. families had to find ways to balance the needs of their livestock with their own need for personal space and privacy. They also had to contend with the mess and potential dangers of having animals roaming freely in their homes. In this video, we will delve into the daily lives of medieval peasants and explore how they coped with the challenges of living in a byre house. Join us as we bring to life the sights, sounds, and smells of a medieval peasant cottage, complete with its human and animal inhabitant. You will all discover how families kept their homes clean and safe despite the constant presence of livestock, and learn about the unique challenges and advantages of this way of life. Get ready to experience a bygone era like never before. Each morning, as the first rays of sunlight peeked through the cracks in the wooden shutters, the family stirred from their slumber. The eldest son, Thomas, accustomed to his early responsibilities, was already up and tending to the hearth, coaxing the dying embers back to life. His younger brother, William, still drowsy-eyed, helped gather firewood, their small hands struggling to carry logs as thick as their waists. Meanwhile, their father, a burly man with forearms like knotted roots, prepared to milk the family's 2 cows and 3 goats, their udders heavy with fresh milk from the previous evening's milking. As the milking commenced, their mother, a woman of quiet strength, with hands as gnarled and strong as the branches she gathered during the autumn, hummed a wordless tune, her gaze drifting to the door where their evening guest, a stubborn oxen, awaited their turn for breakfast. After the cows and goats were fed and their stalls cleaned, it was time for the family to tend to their chickens. The air in the byre, as the animal enclosure within their home was called, was thick with the smell of hay and dung, making it necessary to cover one's nose and mouth with a linen cloth while tending to the animals. Each chicken coop housed around 10 birds, and their clucking filled the air as Thomas and William collected their eggs, careful not to startle the skittish creatures. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows through the open doorway, the family's routine continued. Laundry day meant gathering herbs and flowers from the garden, which doubled as a source of income by selling excess blooms in the village market. The youngest daughter, Elara, with her bright eyes and nimble fingers, helped sort the flowers into neat bundles. Her brother, William, ever helpful, the bundles to the washing area, where their mother demonstrated how to properly scrub and dry the family's limited supply of linen garments. Meanwhile, their father, returning from a trip to the neighboring village, had purchased much-needed supplies, including fresh vegetables, candles, and bread. The family gathered around the table, sharing a simple meal of bread, cheese, and vegetables. Each item savored for its contribution to their survival during the harsh winter months. As the meal ended, Alara's gaze drifted to the basket of flowers, a burst of color amidst the muted tones of their daily life. Her mother, ever attuned to her daughter's needs, suggested making flower crowns, an activity that brought a smile to the young girl's face. As the afternoon wore on, Thomas, the eldest son, assisted his father in preparing the fields for the next planting season. While the soil was too hard for plowing, the mild winter temperatures allowed for essential maintenance tasks, such as mending fences and clearing debris. The men worked in silence, their movements efficient and precise, each swing of the hammer or adjustment of the plow line contributing to the future prosperity of their small farm. By the time the sun began its descent, the family was reunited within the warm embrace of their buyer. As the temperature dropped and darkness crept in, the animals sought solace near the hearth, their bodies generating precious heat and their presence offering a comforting familiarity. The family, too, found warmth in their shared space, drawing closer together as the cold seeped through the cracks in the walls. With chores completed and the night drawing in, the family gathered around the hearth, sharing stories and laughter to pass the time until bedtime. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows on the weathered faces of the peasants, momentarily chasing away the darkness both outside and within. The scent of wood smoke and roasting meat filled the air as the family prepared their evening meal. Over the crackling fire, they shared stories of their day, their voices echoing in the spaciousness created by their shared living quarters. The younger members of the family, nestled between their parents, listened intently, their imaginations running wild with each tale. As the meal ended, a sense of contentment settled over the family, a feeling of gratitude for their simple life and the love that bound them together. But this idyllic scene was not without its challenges. Living in a buyer house required a delicate balance between human and animal inhabitants. The family had to carefully manage the needs of both, ensuring that neither suffered due to the close proximity. For example, they needed to find ways to store their food securely, separating their provisions from the animals' feed to prevent contamination and moreover, they had to establish clear boundaries within their living space, creating areas that were off-limits to the animals to ensure their own privacy and personal space. These measures were crucial for maintaining order and preventing potential conflicts between humans and animals. The interior of the typical medieval peasant cottage was divided into two main areas. The upper level consisted of 1 or 2 rooms, used primarily for sleeping, eating and storing goods. These rooms were typically dark and cramped, lacking in furniture except for basic items like stools or settles. The lower level, on the other hand, housed the family's byre, which served as both a stable for their livestock and a communal area for human habitation. The byre was usually located at the rear of the cottage and was directly accessible from the exterior, allowing for easy entry and exit for both humans and animals. The layout of the byre varied depending on the size of the family and their livestock, but generally included stalls for cows and goats, as well as roosts for chickens. The stalls were typically made of wood and were designed to keep the animals confined and separated, ensuring they couldn't roam freely throughout the cottage. One of the challenges of living in a byre house was maintaining cleanliness and hygiene. With animals constantly present, the risk of contamination and disease was high. To mitigate this, medieval peasants developed strategies to keep their living areas as sanitary as possible. They frequently used herbs and flowers gathered during the summer months to impart a pleasant smell to their homes and linens, attempting to counteract the less pleasant aromas associated with livestock. Additionally, they placed great emphasis on personal cleanliness, understanding its importance in preventing illness. Bathing, though infrequent, was considered essential, and full baths were often enjoyed during warmer months when temperatures permitted. Regular hand washing was also practiced, particularly before and after meals, as a means of ensuring basic hygiene and reducing the spread of germs. Despite the challenges of living in a byre house, This practice offered unique advantages for medieval peasants. One of the most significant benefits was the constant supply of fresh milk, cheese, and eggs provided by their animals. This ensured that the family had access to vital nutrients year-round, contributing to their overall health and well-being. Additionally, the animals provided a sense of security, keeping inhabitants warm and warding off potential predators. However, managing a shared living space with animals required careful planning and organization. Families had to find ways to balance the needs of their livestock with their own need for personal space and privacy. They also had to contend with the mess and potential dangers of having animals roaming freely in their homes. Living in a byre house was a testament to the resourcefulness and adaptability of medieval peasants. By sharing their living space with their animals, they were able to harness the benefits of a communal living arrangement while mitigating the challenges through clever planning and organization. The close proximity of humans and animals created a unique bond, fostering a sense of community and interdependence. The animals provided warmth, sustenance, and companionship, while the peasants cared for their needs and ensured their well-being. It was a symbiotic relationship that highlighted the resilience and ingenuity of those who lived in a byre house. Thank you for joining us on this journey through a typical day in the life of a medieval peasant family living in a byre house. We hope you've enjoyed this glimpse into their daily routines, challenges, and triumphs. In the heart of the frost-leaden village, the blacksmith's forge stands as a beacon of warmth and industry, its stone walls heavy with the scent of coal smoke and hot iron. The blacksmith, a burly man with soot-streaked hands, wears a heavy woolen tunic beneath a thick leather apron, linen wrappings shielding his forearms from flying sparks. Sturdy, wool-lined leather boots and a woolen cap or coif protect him from the chill of the open doorway. His breath visible in the crisp air, he pumps the bellows to coax flames and sparks from the forge. Villagers in woolen cloaks and mittens bring tools and horseshoes for repair as the rhythmic clang of hammer on anvil echoes through the winter quiet. Children bundled in smaller versions of adult clothing. Watch as glowing metal is shaped and cooled. The blacksmith's skill, mending plowshares, crafting nails and shoeing horses, keeps the village's tools and animals ready for winter's challenges, making his forge a vital symbol of community resilience. The wind howls like a hungry wolf outside the blacksmith shop, rattling the shutters set over the windows. Inside, the space is comfortably dark, lit by the orange glow of the hearth, where a roaring fire feeds the forge. Sparks leap and dance in the gloom. Every so often, one will escape the confines of the chimney and race down its breast, vanishing into the blackness of the night. On this side of the hearth, the blacksmith sits cross-legged on a stool, sharpening a horseshoe with a coarse grindstone. He works with such familiarity that each turn of the stone is measured and sure, though every so often a stray spark will escape the forge and land on his thick leather apron, sizzling faintly as it does so. The blacksmith has been working since before sunrise, and his back aches with the effort. It is work, honest and hard, but there is satisfaction in it too. Seeing a piece of metal come new from the fires, knowing that it will be useful, that it will be put to good use, and outlast even he himself. To his right, resting on an anvil is a horseshoe he has just finished. And it is a fine piece of work, shaped perfectly and, no doubt about it, strong enough to withstand the hardest of pulls from even the most stubborn of farm horses. It is not just tools that he mends, you see, but also odds and ends brought in by villagers. Things with sentimental value that are too odd for him to name. Things with sharp edges that have become dull with age or worn smooth from use until they are almost useless. He gives each item his full attention because if he doesn't, what guarantee does anyone have that their treasured possession will survive another year? He hears the sound of the heavy wooden door creaking inward. Before he sees her standing in the opening, a girl. She must be 8 summers, all of 9 at the most, with cheeks red from the cold and breath stilling in the air. Her hair is pulled back from her face and bundled in a woolen shawl, which is tossed over her shoulder when she comes further into the smithy. In one hand, she holds a pair of shears. They were once silver. He can see, now dulled by years of constant use. A pang of sympathy goes out to her. The girl's father must have died recently. If her mother is still living, then this must be a treasured keepsake. "What can I do for you?" he asks kindly, setting down his tools. "My scissors," the girl stammers, holding them out to him. "They won't cut any more. Can you fix them?" He takes the shears from her and examines them. They are blunt now, as dull as could be, the edges worn completely smooth from overuse. He knows the feeling, the way something can become so familiar you almost take it for granted, only to realize someday it's gone. He says, "Leave them with me and I'll see what I can do." And although the girl seems reluctant to leave them out of her sight, she eventually does, trusting him with a shy smile and the promise of return before sunset. As the girl leaves, he sets about his task. He stokes up the forge and gathers his tools. The girl's scissors are too small for his usual anvils, so he selects a small one and places the shears upon it. With a ring of steel, he heats the dull edge in the coals until it glows red hot. Then he draws it out and lets it cool in a bucket of water, taking it out to reveal the newly sharpened tool gleaming under the dim light of the forge. He tests the edge against his thumb. It is sharp again, keen enough to slice paper. He sets the scissors aside and reaches for another tool, a long knife that looks like it has seen better days. Well, it has been used often, that is for certain, but the edge has been maintained, kept sharp and true. He feels a twinge of regret when he thinks about returning this one to its owner. He would rather keep it for himself than send it back out into the world. But this is his life. It is his duty to keep the village's tools in good repair, and he would not trade it for all the gold in the kingdom. It's nearly midday now, and he takes a break to eat. He has saved a crust of bread from last night's supper, and with it he spreads a thin layer of cheese. The fat congealed and firm from the cold. It tastes like heaven. Afterwards, he washes his hands and face with cold water from a bucket, then returns to his work. The afternoon passes quickly. Soon, the girl will be returning for her scissors. He wonders what else people will bring in. Perhaps some tools for the coming spring. Or maybe a kettle with a loose bottom, or perhaps an old pickaxe with a broken handle. People rely on him, and he does not disappoint. A gust of wind whistles through the crack in the door, carrying with it the faint sounds of children's laughter. The girl is back. She enters timidly, glancing around as though afraid of being seen. She approaches slowly, then calls out, "Are my scissors ready?" He takes the shears from his work table and holds them out to her. The girl's eyes widen and she reaches out to take them, her fingers brushing his. As he looks at her, he sees not a child, but a miniature version of a woman, her whole future stretching ahead of her like a newly sharpened blade. She thanks him with shining eyes, and after she is left, he returns to his work. The rhythm of hammer on anvil echoing in the quiet smithy as twilight begins to fall. Outside, the snow continues to fall, covering the village in white and muffling the sounds of the day. Inside the blacksmith shop, the fire crackles merrily, casting dancing shadows on the walls. From his stool, the blacksmith watches the flames and remembers a time long past when he was young and his father had taught him the secrets of the forge. Back then, the world seemed full of possibilities. He had thought he could create anything from metal, anything at all. Experience had tempered that enthusiasm, leaving behind a quiet satisfaction in his skill. Now he makes only what is needed: tools and horseshoes, nails and arrowheads, and each one is made to last. As the last sliver of sun dips below the horizon, the blacksmith closes up shop. The rhythmic clang of hammer on anvil falls silent. He pulls on his heavy coat, layers of wool and leather, and secures his hood before going out into the falling snow. The cold air bites at his cheeks, but he pulls his head back and walks on, his footsteps crunching in the snow. Houses pass by, each with a warm glow spilling from its windows, each filled with the murmur of family and friends gathered close against the winter night. The blacksmith turns toward home, pulling his collar tighter against the wind. He can hear the shouts of children playing, their laughter ringing out over the quiet rooftops. The forge may be dark until morning, but the embers are still warm. And tomorrow, when the sun rises, the blacksmith will be there to greet it, ready to shape the metal once more. The Feast of St. Nicholas Day. Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. Each year, as the cold of December deepened, the medieval village observed the Feast of St. Nicholas with a blend of piety and communal celebration. The day began with a solemn procession to the parish church. There the priest, robed in his finest liturgical vestments, perhaps a chasuble or cope for special feast days, led the assembled villagers in prayers for divine protection, the health of their families, and a prosperous year ahead. The church, adorned with simple tapestries and lit by beeswax candles, echoed with the voices of the faithful as they chanted hymns and offered their petitions. After the service, the villagers, men in long woolen tunics, belted at the waist, paired with hose and sturdy leather shoes, women in woolen kirtles, with linen undergarments and veils or coifs covering their hair, and children dressed in scaled-down versions of adult attire, made their way to the communal hall. This great room, often the largest and most central space in the village, was warmed by crackling fires in the hearth, and illuminated by the glow of tallow candles and oil lamps. The air was rich with the aromas of roasting meats, freshly baked breads, and pies, made from preserved fruits and honey. while pitchers of spiced ale and mulled cider circulated among the revelers. As the afternoon wore on, the mood shifted from the religious observance of the morning to the more light-hearted merriment associated with St. Nicholas Day. Minstrels might have entertained the crowd with lively tunes on their instruments, while villagers, both young and old, engaged in games and contests. For the younger members of the community, pursuits such as blind man espuff or hare and tortoise added an element of excitement and laughter to the festivities. Meanwhile, adults might have tested their skills in archery contests or engaged in friendly competitions of strength and dexterity. These activities not only provided amusement, but also served as a means of strengthening bonds within the community. As the evening deepened, the celebration might have culminated in a grand feast shared by all. Long tables, laden with roasted poultry, savory stews and seasonal fruits, would have been set up, reflecting the bounty of the harvest and the village's prosperity. Amidst the merriment, the figure of St. Nicholas himself might have made an appearance, either through a symbolic representation or even a costumed villager acting as the saint. The legend goes that St. Nicholas, known for his generosity and kindness, would leave gifts for children, particularly those who were less fortunate. In medieval villages, it was uncommon for villagers to leave out shoes or other containers for St. Nicholas to fill with treats, and in some cases, the saint might have made a grand entrance carrying sacks filled with gifts for the children of the village. This tradition of gift-giving carried on in modern times, with Santa Claus filling stockings or leaving presents under Christmas trees, but its roots can be traced back to those medieval celebrations of the Feast of St. Nicholas. As the celebration drew to a close, the villagers, their faces flushed with the warmth of companionship and good cheer, would have retired to their homes, carrying with them the spirit of the feast and the anticipation of the many blessings that the new year might bring. But what about St. Nicholas himself? Who was this legendary figure whose feast day inspired such joy and merriment? St. Nicholas was born in the 3rd century AD in Patara, a city located in what is now Turkey. From an early age, he was known for his piety and generosity, particularly towards children. A popular legend tells of how St. Nicholas saved 3 sisters from being sold into slavery by secretly providing dowries for each of them. As a young man, he devoted his life to Christianity and eventually became the Bishop of Myra. During his time as a bishop, he continued to exhibit remarkable generosity, giving away his possessions to the poor and using his influence to help those in need. One story recounts how St. Nicholas intervened to save the unjustly accused from persecution, even raising the dead in one instance to prove their innocence. He was deeply revered during his lifetime and after his death. On December 6, 343, he was venerated as a saint throughout the Christian world. His reputation for kindness and benevolence, particularly towards children, solidified over the centuries, leading to numerous miracles and legends being associated with him. In fact, St. Nicholas became so popular that he was even invoked to protect sailors and travelers. Over time, his feast day on December evolved into a time for children to receive gifts and for communities to come together in celebration. With the growth of Christianity and the merging of pagan traditions, the Feast of St. Nicholas became a significant event on the Christian calendar, setting the stage for the joyous festivities we associate with Santa Claus or Father Christmas today. Now let's take a closer look at the attire worn by villagers during the feast of St. Nicholas. Men typically wore long woolen tunics, reaching down to their knees or lower, which helped to keep them warm in the chilly winter months. These tunics were often belted at the waist to allow for greater ease of movement. The tunics were usually tucked into a pair of hose, which were close-fitting knitted or woolen leg coverings that reached up to the mid-thigh or the knee. Hose were secured with garters or straps that were fastened above the knee. For footwear, villagers wore sturdy leather shoes that were well suited for walking on uneven terrain or trudging through snow. These shoes were typically laced or buckled to ensure a secure fit. Women's attire consisted of woolen kirtles that also reached down to the knees or ankles. These long dresses were loose-fitting and were worn over a linen under tunic or chemise that reached to the waist or hips. The kirtle was often fastened with a belt or a cord at the waist, defining the upper and lower sections of the dress. To further insulate against the cold, women might have worn a sleeveless woolen overdress over their In addition to these outer garments, women also wore a headscarf or a veil to cover their hair. These could be secured with a linen or woolen coat, which was a type of close-fitting cap that was designed to be worn under a larger head covering. For footwear, women typically wore leather shoes or low-cut red leather boots that were practical for everyday wear. Children's clothing was generally a scaled-down version of adult attire, with boys wearing tunics and hose similar to their fathers, while girls wore dresses that resembled their mother's garments. These clothes were not only functional, but also served as a way to instill a sense of identity and community among the villagers. The emphasis on warm materials and practical designs reflected the harsh realities of medieval life during the winter season, while the inclusion of traditional elements such as belts and hose added a touch of regional character to the outfits. Furthermore, the choice of colors and fabrics often held significance, with wool being a common material for its insulating properties and leather being valued for its durability and weather resistance. Overall, the attire worn by villagers during the feast of St. Nicholas was a combination of necessity and tradition, offering a glimpse into the daily lives and cultural norms of medieval rural communities. Thank you for joining me on this journey back to the medieval village for the feast of St. Nicholas. The winter months were always the hardest time of year for medieval peasants. The cold temperatures, lack of available food, and the ever-present threat of starvation made it so that many villagers would perish each and every year. But despite all of these hardships, life during the winter still went on. Villagers had developed countless ways to preserve their food for the winter. They crafted warm and durable clothing from animal skins, and they built sturdy houses out of stone and wood to keep the cold out. And while it is true that many villagers did die during the winter, it is also true that many lived through it because of the skills and knowledge passed down from generation to generation. So today we're going to be exploring some of those ways that medieval peasants survived the harsh winters of the Middle Ages. Food preservation. One of the most important aspects of surviving the winter was preserving food. Without modern technology, medieval peasants had to rely on traditional methods such as drying, smoking, and pickling to keep their food fresh. During the harvest season, they would gather as much food as possible, then process and store it for the winter months. They dried fruits and vegetables, salted and smoked meats and fish, and pickled vegetables in brine. This ensured that they had a steady supply of nutrients during the winter when fresh food was scarce. Animal husbandry. Another crucial aspect of winter survival was animal husbandry. Livestock such as cows, pigs, and sheep provided villagers with essential resources like meat, milk, and wool. During the winter, animals were typically kept inside barns or stables, where they were fed on stored fodder. By taking good care of their animals, villagers could ensure that they had enough to eat and stay warm during the colder months. Additionally, the dung from animals could be used as fuel for fires, providing villagers with a source of heat and light. Hunting and trapping. In addition to raising livestock, hunting and trapping wild animals was also an important way for medieval peasants to obtain food during the winter. Small game such as rabbits and squirrels provided a valuable source of protein, and trapping larger animals like deer and wild boar could provide enough meat to sustain a family for several days. However, hunting and trapping were often dangerous and difficult, and success was not guaranteed. Foraging. Foraging for wild food sources was another important aspect of winter survival. In areas where forests and fields were available, peasants could gather nuts, berries, mushrooms, and other wild plants to supplement their diets. This was especially important in times of scarcity, when other food sources were running low. However, it was important to have knowledge of the local plants to avoid poisonous varieties, and only what was needed should be taken to ensure that there was enough for everyone. Clothing and shelter. Staying warm and dry was essential to surviving the winter, and this meant that peasants needed to have access to warm clothing and sturdy shelter. During the winter, peasants wore multiple layers of clothing to trap heat and keep the cold out. They also wore hats, scarves, and gloves to protect their extremities, which are vulnerable to the cold. Common materials for winter clothing included wool, linen, and leather, and peasants would often make their own clothes to fit their needs. In terms of shelter, peasants typically lived in small villages, made up of simple homes made out of wood and thatch. However, in some areas, peasants lived in more substantial stone houses that were better able to withstand the winter weather. It was important that the homes were well insulated and had a central hearth to provide warmth and light during the long, dark days of winter. Community and cooperation. Finally, community and cooperation were essential to the survival of medieval peasants during the winter. Living in close-knit communities allowed villagers to share resources and support each other during times of need. They would often gather together in the evenings to share stories, music, and news, which helped to build a sense of community and camaraderie. Cooperation was also essential when it came to tasks such as harvesting crops, building shelters, and caring for livestock. By working together, villagers could accomplish more than they could on their own, and everyone shared in the rewards. In conclusion, medieval peasants faced numerous challenges during the winter months, but they developed a variety of strategies to survive the harsh conditions. From preserving food to raising livestock, hunting and trapping, foraging, wearing warm clothing and living in sturdy shelters, each aspect of their lives was carefully adapted to the challenges of the season. Additionally, their strong sense of community and cooperation helped them to overcome the difficulties of winter and sustain their way of life. While it is true that many peasants died during the winter, it is important to remember that many others survived and thrived due to their resourcefulness, adaptability, and willingness to help one another. But life wasn't all bad during the winter. There were still plenty of reasons to celebrate. In fact, many villages would hold festivals and events during the winter months to boost morale and bring people together. For example, the Yule festival was a common celebration of the winter solstice, and villagers might hold feasts, parties, and even plays to mark the occasion. These festivals provided a welcome distraction from the harsh realities of winter, and gave people a chance to let loose and have fun. Of course, the end of the winter was also a time for celebration. As the days grew longer and warmer, people would look forward to the return of spring and the promise of new beginnings. The end of winter was a reminder that no matter how difficult things were, they would eventually get better. And that's something worth celebrating. Warm drinks. Of course, staying warm during the winter was a top priority for medieval peasants. And what better way to do that than with a nice cup of something warm to drink? Hot beverages were an important part of everyday life in medieval villages, and they weren't just for the winter months either. People drank warm drinks throughout the year, and there were a variety of different types of hot beverages available. Water was often heated over an open fire, and this was the most common drink of all. However, water that was boiled was believed to have additional health benefits, so it was often used to treat ailments such as sore throats and colds for those who could afford it. Milk was another popular option, and it was often heated and mixed with spices such as cinnamon or ginger. This type of drink was considered a luxury item, however, and it was not as common as plain water or beer. Beer was another popular option, and it was actually considered safe to drink during the winter months, when water could be contaminated with snow and ice. Beer was also a source of nutrition during the winter months, and it was often served with meals. The hearth was the center of life in a medieval peasant's home. It provided warmth and light during the long, dark winter nights, and it was also used for cooking and heating water. Hearths were often built from stone or brick, and they were large enough to accommodate a small family. Peasants would keep their hearths constantly fed with small sticks and twigs to ensure that they had a steady source of heat and light. Hearths were not just practical. However, they were also an important source of comfort and security for families during the winter. The warmth of the hearth created a cozy atmosphere, and the flickering flames provided a sense of security during the long nights. Families would often gather around the hearth to eat meals, tell stories, and spend time together. The hearth was a symbol of home and family, and it played an important role in keeping spirits high during the winter months. And finally, let's talk about storytelling. Storytelling was an important part of life in medieval villages, and it was especially popular during the long winter nights. People would gather round the hearth and share stories with each other, and this was a great way to pass the time and stay entertained during the winter. Stories were often about local legends, myths, and folklore, and they were sometimes used to teach moral lessons. Storytellers would use their voices to create vivid images in the minds of their audience, and they would often use props and costumes to enhance their performances. Storytelling was not just a form of entertainment. However, it was also a way for people to connect with each other and build a sense of community. Sharing stories allowed people to learn more about each other and to bond over their shared experiences. Well, that's it for today's video. Thanks for tuning in. Please don't forget to like and subscribe for more historical tales from us here at When History Hits. Snooze, good night.